Good evening and welcome to this special edition of Cronkite News on Arizona PBS. I'm Sam Hoyle and thank you for joining us. Cronkite News is committed to covering our nation's capital from our Washington, D.C. bureau. Tonight, a look back on stories including how requirements for work visas are impacting the economy, as well as Arizona students in the National Spelling Bee.
Unemployment in the United States has reached its lowest level in 18 years. The most recent jobless rate of 3.8% represents virtually full employment, according to economists. That's good news for workers, but it's causing problems for businesses across the country, as Papabletti reports in the Washington bureau.
Businesses that I spoke with told me that they can't find American workers willing to do the jobs they need, and they can't get permission to hire foreign workers who would be willing to come in and do those jobs due to H-2B visa restrictions. And that, they say, is ultimately harming American workers on the payroll right now.
We're not going to be able to keep operating.
It's a crisis.
We can't keep going the way we are right now.
That was Harry Phillips and Jack Brooks, owner of two of the largest seafood distributing companies on the East Coast. Despite paying a base salary well above minimum wage and offering hourly incentives, neither can attract local workers.
We've tried everything. We've had job fairs, we advertise in the paper, we've done everything possible to hire American workers.
Parents have stopped encouraging their kids to be the best crab picker they can be.
Since they can't find Americans to do the job, Phillips and Brooks have been forced to look abroad for workers to keep their businesses afloat. They have turned to the H-2B visa system, a seasonal guest worker program that lets foreign nationals work in the United States for up to 10 months at a time. But the program has its drawbacks. As Lori Flanagan of the H-2B Workforce Coalition explains, it's expensive, it's intentionally complicated to protect American jobs, and recently, it has been overwhelmed by the number of businesses seeking help.
The Department of Labor had certified a need for about 142,000 H-2B workers.
Despite the number approved by the Labor Department, current law only allows the Department of Homeland Security to issue 66,000 visas, which are randomly selected through a lottery. Businesses that don't win the lottery are left without the workers they so desperately need. Businesses like Brightview Landscape in the Valley.
The client will leave us and go somewhere else because we can't fulfill it. Therefore, we lose revenue. And then in the wintertime, when we slow down a little bit, we have to lay off people that we usually employ year-round. So it kind of hurts the regular employees that we have that we employ year-round as well.
Back on the Eastern Shore, Brooks got his allocation, and J.M. Clayton Company is busy at work. Phillips, on the other hand, did not.
We're going behind a little every week, just hoping and praying that we get our visas to bring these workers here.
Without crab pickers, Phillips says he had to lay off Americans, drivers, technicians, secretaries, and support staff.
So this is a ripple effect of different businesses that it's affected by not having these migrant workers here to pick the crab meat.
Flanagan told me that each H-2B visa supports between 4 to 5 American jobs. Now, Congress recently approved an emergency allocation of 69,000 additional visas, but the Department of Homeland Security, who's in charge of issuing those visas, has only released 15,000 so far. In Washington, Pat Pobletti, Cronkite News.
The U.S. unemployment rate is at an 18-year low and is under 4%, but the jobless rate for Native Americans is nearly 3 times higher. Cronkite News reporter Ariana Bustos in our Washington bureau caught up with experts on what needs to be done to lower unemployment rates on the reservations.
Melinda Andrews, executive advisor to the Hopi chairman, said she sees the impact unemployment has on her community.
Having a high unemployment rate, I can see all the detrimental effects that it's having to not only children, but to the families, grandparents, aunts, uncles. It's the entire family.
Harry Holzer, professor of public policy at Georgetown University, says while Native American unemployment is better, the numbers don't reflect the situation on reservations, where unemployment rates either remain stagnant or get worse.
It's going to be hard for the area overall to ever make progress when their best and most successful people are always moving away. And I would think that's maybe more true of Indian reservations than almost any other kind of geographic community in the country.
Andrews echoed that sentiment and said due to the 60% unemployment rate on the Hopi reservation, it's so hard to get a job that once you do, you have to stick with it. Algernon Austin, an economist at Demos, said underinvestment in Indian country doesn't make things better.
There's a long list of broken treaties, broken commitments, And I think that also goes into sort of the investment in economic development in the communities.
Chris James, president and CEO of the National Center for American Indian Enterprise Development, agreed that more should be done to invest in these communities.
How do we get our existing businesses to the next level, but also how do we grow more businesses in Indian country to create the jobs, to have a strong economy, to support tribal leadership and support tribal programs as well.
Andrew said the people on reservations are living between two worlds.
So you're having to deal with traditional lifestyles versus going the Western lifestyle to get your bills paid, keep your electricity on, purchase food, that type of thing, whereas way back when we grew our own food.
Reporting from Washington, Ariana Bustos, Cronkite News.
Arizona's response to the opioid crisis took center stage at a forum in Washington this morning, where Governor Doug Ducey touted a program for dealing with families hit by addiction.
Danny Coburn, our Washington bureau, was on hand for the governor's appearance at the American Enterprise Institute.
The AEI program looked at ways to get treatment for addicted parents and protect their children in the foster care system. To Governor Ducey, Arizona's approach just makes sense.
SENSE is short for a substance-exposed newborn safe environment, which started as a pilot program in Maricopa County and has since spread statewide. The goal of the program is to keep kids and parents together, even if the parents have been found with drugs.
In the past, if a parent who gave birth to a baby with illegal substances in their system might have expected to have that child removed immediately and returned after sobriety had been achieved. But we felt this could force parents to choose between their children and getting help.
And he said it's working. 9 in 10 families in Maricopa County who finished the program had no reports with the Department of Child Safety 6 months later. Ducey concedes that keeping families together may not be the right call in all cases, which is why he stressed the importance of churches and community members stepping forward to help out, either as a volunteer or a foster family.
We've made some progress fighting the opioid crisis in Arizona and keeping children and families together, but we know these fights are far from over.
Another speaker, Harvard Law professor Elizabeth Bartlett, said that she believes the best approach is often to remove a child from homes where drugs are present. But Bartlett, who runs the child advocacy program at Harvard, credited the Arizona program for requiring treatment for parents.
Also addresses drug issues, which are absolutely central to the abuse and neglect problem.
The census program is just one effort in a broader state program to fight the opioid epidemic, a fight Ducey said is starting to see results. He said Arizona has already seen a 33% drop in opioid prescriptions and a 60% decrease in patients, quote, doctor hopping, but there's still a long way to go.
You want to find loving foster homes or adoptive homes, and ideally, if you can find sobriety for the mother, that's an even happier ending.
The numbers back up what Ducey said. Since June 15th of last year, there has been 1,280 suspected opioid deaths and more than 8,200 suspected overdoses, according to the State Department of Health. In Washington, Danny Coble, Cronkite News.
Cronkite News is dedicated to covering the opioid crisis in Arizona and nationwide. You can watch our documentary Hooked RX, From Prescription to Addiction, and help find resources for getting help online at hookedrx.org.
Hundreds of deaths, thousands of overdoses, millions of pills. The numbers surrounding the state's opioid epidemic can be mind-numbing. But one company thinks it's found a way to take those numbers and more and use them in the fight against the epidemic. Danny Coble has a story from our Washington bureau.
It's 2018 and we're still talking about the opioid epidemic, but some companies want to use a different approach to combat the issue. That approach leans on technology. At a Capitol Hill demonstration today, SAP Software Solutions demonstrated how data gathered from multiple government reports can be presented in one easily accessible dashboard that shows just how big the opioid epidemic is.
And so this is a technology base, a data-driven technology base to help understand and find the root causes of some of these challenges that we have in the opioid domain.
That may sound simple until you consider all the data policymakers have to decipher. Everything from crime to preventive efforts, from the type of drugs being used to overprescribing, not to mention addiction and overdose numbers. The dashboard can put all of that into one place. The technology known as a purpose-driven framework launched about a month ago. While it is still targeted at the opioid epidemic, the company says it can be applied to any set of problems from homelessness to social services.
Framework can be applied to any problem, and it's about bringing the right technology platform to harness information in a new, powerful way.
Developers said it would be up to each state to determine how or if to use the software.
So Governor Ducey has a very strong position on this. We have talked with the governor at a very high level. We have not instituted anything with Arizona specifically, SAP that is, but I know the governor and his staff are actively working this issue.
Governor Ducey in January laid out a multi-point plan to address opioids, an epidemic that has led more than 1,300 deaths and more than 8,200 suspected overdoses since last June, according to the state health department. While the numbers are available to the public, this type of graph form is not, making it very difficult to go where you want to see the information. These graphs will make it simpler, which is why the company wants Congress to start investing in this type of technology. Reporting from Capitol Hill in Washington, Danny Coble, Cronkite News.
As journalists at Cronkite News, we report on stories that matter to you by focusing on the local impact. We dig deeper and work tirelessly to keep you informed.
Live in Wickerburg.
Live in Los Angeles. In Cleveland. In Washington. In Louisville.
From Jerusalem. Live in Philadelphia. From around the world to right here in Phoenix.
At Cronkite News, we report the facts and stick to the truth.
Now, years after a bakery refused to create a wedding cake for a same-sex couple, the Supreme Court rules in favor of the Colorado bakery owner. In 2012, the baker said he would not make the cake because it went against his religious belief.
Cronkite News has team coverage from the nation's capital to Arizona. We begin with Pat Publetti in our Washington bureau.
In one of its most highly anticipated decisions of the year, the Supreme Court ruled today that a Colorado baker cannot be forced to make a wedding cake for a same-sex couple, a decision he says would violate his deeply held religious beliefs. Both sides on this issue believe that this is far from over, though. The court ruled 7-2 in favor of Jack Phillips, the owner of Masterpiece Cake Shop, who had been found to have violated a state law preventing discrimination based on sexual orientation when he refused to create a wedding cake for David Mullins and Charlie Craig. Justice Anthony Kennedy, writing for the court's majority, said that the case had elements of a clear and impermissible hostility towards Phillips' religious belief. Michael Ferris is president of Scottsdale-based Alliance Defending Freedom, which argued Phillips' case. He celebrated the victory on the steps of the Supreme Court.
Religious freedom was affirmed by the court. The court said that the way Colorado approached the case was discriminatory against his religion and that tolerance is a two-way street and he needs to be tolerated just like everybody else.
However, Ferris did acknowledge that the scope of this case was narrowly drawn, a point which Sarah Warbelow, the legal director of the Human Rights Campaign, believes will set the stage for other LGBTQ cases in the future.
the court actually took the opportunity to reaffirm the humanity and dignity of LGBTQ people and did not give businesses a license to discriminate against the LGBTQ community.
The decision leaves broader legal questions unanswered, and Justice Kennedy pointed out that future cases may end up with a different ruling. Masterpiece Cake Shop is not the only case challenging laws like Colorado's. 2 Phoenix women who run a calligraphy business are challenging a city law that would force them to produce wedding invitations for same-sex couples. On the steps of the Supreme Court, Pat Pobletti, Cronkite News.
Local reaction is similar to what we're hearing in Washington. Emily Richardson talked with Valley Groups to get their reaction.
The Supreme Court case is similar to a 2016 case in Arizona where the co-owners of a calligraphy studio filed a suit challenging Phoenix's anti-discrimination ordinance. The 2 women claimed that the law violated their freedom of speech and religion.
It wasn't like a person was turned away. The business owners were saying they just have a right to discriminate. They shouldn't have to comply with this non-discrimination law, and that was ruled, they didn't have that right.
According to the ACLU, while the results of the Masterpiece Cake Shop versus Colorado Civil Rights Commission were not what they wanted, they believe the Supreme Court reaffirmed the longstanding rule that states can prevent discrimination in the marketplace. ASU law professor and expert in freedom of religion and constitutional law, Paul Bender, says it's clear the Supreme Court is saying you cannot discriminate against gay couples if there is an anti-discriminatory law in your state.
This guy was not just refusing to do business with a gay couple. He said, I'll sell you anything in the store, but I don't want to make a custom wedding cake for you. That raises, the court says, I think, and I think they're right, a difficult question of balancing his religious freedom against the state's desire not to have gays discriminated against.
Bender also says that this ruling does not mean anything for future cases similar to this because it's specific circumstances with the Colorado court acting hostile towards the baker's religion. However, Kevin Patterson with Equality Arizona says this case proves the importance of increased federal LGBT rights.
I think the best way to remove all bigotry and all forms of discrimination would be to have something at the federal level that protects all the way across the country.
We reached out to the owners of the calligraphy studio in Phoenix, but they did not respond. Currently, members of the LGBT community are not protected in Arizona's statewide anti-discriminatory law. In the Broadcast Center, Emily Richardson, Cronkite News.
Twitter is one of President Donald Trump's favorite ways of communicating. But does that communication have to go 2 ways? And does that apply to politicians other than the president? Pat Pobletti in our Washington bureau has a story of that free speech debate.
A federal judge ruled that President Donald Trump violated the First Amendment rights of 7 Twitter users when he blocked them from viewing his real Donald Trump Twitter account. Do those same restrictions apply to members of Congress? Experts disagree. Representative Paul Gosar of Prescott is currently being sued by the Arizona chapter of the American Civil Liberties Union for blocking 2 constituents on social media. Due to the pending lawsuit, Gosar's office declined our request for comment. ACLU attorney Darrell Hill says that Gosar has infringed on the rights of his clients to express opposing viewpoints. He believes that the First Amendment prohibits public officials from suppressing speech on the basis of the speaker's viewpoint, and that the decision regarding President Trump applies to all public officials. But Elliot Mintzberg, senior fellow at People for the American Way, is a little more skeptical.
There are some certainly unique things to the president's Twitter account that may or may not apply to what Representative Gosar has done.
He says the judge's ruling is narrowly defined to President Trump. Mintzberg believes U.S. District Court in Arizona could rule differently in Gosar's case than its counterpart in New York did in Trump's. In a social media landscape which can quickly turn toxic, it raises the question of where the line of acceptable communication is drawn. Longtime political communications strategist John Randall believes that as public figures, members of Congress shouldn't shy away from public discourse.
We need to make sure that we're embracing it, but that we're also trying to encourage debate that moves the conversation forward. And
while Gosar has subsequently unblocked his constituents on social media, the White House did not respond to our questions about whether the president has done the same. In Washington, Pat Pobletti, Cronkite News.
It's a legal settlement that will change nothing in the law, but change everything in terms of how easy it is for voters to register in Arizona. Pat Pobletti in our Washington bureau explains how a lawsuit led election officials to change the way that they do business.
Thanks, Victoria. Now, just yesterday, Arizona election officials agreed to settle a lawsuit which claimed that the state's voter registration process irrationally disenfranchised thousands across the state and led directly to voter suppression. Arusha Gordon is an attorney with the Voting Rights Project at the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights Under Law. She is a former Fulbright Fellow and graduate of the University of California, Berkeley's top-rated law school. Yet she believes she might not be able to navigate Arizona's complex voter registration laws.
If you're someone like me who doesn't necessarily know your driver's license off the top of your mind, or have your passport on hand or your birth certificate, and you submit your registration form without that information, it wasn't going into the system.
Under Arizona law, a voter must provide documentary proof of citizenship in order to vote in state and local elections, but only had to fill out a form to vote in federal elections. This created a two-track system, under which it was far more difficult to register for local elections than federal ones. The League of United Latin American Citizens sued Secretary of State Michelle Reagan and Maricopa County Recorder Adrian Fontes, alleging handling state and federal election registration differently was an unconstitutional burden.
It violates the Constitution to treat them in an arbitrary and different manner, and that was really at the root of this case.
Voters still need to be citizens to vote in state elections, but will no longer have to provide proof of citizenship with their application. Their citizenship status will be checked automatically by the state against the Motor Vehicle Department's database. Fontes said he had been working to update voter registration since his 2016 election, when he found tens of thousands of voter registration rejection notices sitting unsent in a warehouse. He took issue with the old registration process, under which the MVD database could be used to check eligibility for federal elections, but not for local.
Well, that to me seemed absurd. Why would you accept a form, be told to check with the federal form, but be barred from checking with a state form? That's clearly an equal protection problem.
Fontes welcomed the change in system, under which he says thousands of Arizonans were denied the right to vote due to unfair policies and bureaucratic red tape. Now, the settlement was celebrated as a win-win situation by all parties involved. In a statement, Secretary of State Michelle Reagan said that we've always said it should be easy to vote and hard to cheat. I'm proud to say that this settlement achieves both. In Washington, Pat Pobletti, Cronkite News.
Wildfires were also a topic of discussion in Washington today, where senators were briefed on the outlook for the upcoming fire season, which they were told could be another difficult one. While there have been some improvements since last year, officials also said that challenges remain, as Danny Coble tells us from our Washington bureau.
That's right. Forest Service and Interior Department officials are saying that they have adequate resources. They have 10,000 firefighters, 900 engines, and hundreds of aircrafts ready. But they're still expecting the 2018 fire season to be a challenging one.
The government spent $2.9 billion fighting wildfires last year, the most expensive year on record. And senators say today that 2018 doesn't look to be much better.
Almost 24,000 wildfires have burned about 1.7 million acres across the country, and this is just June the 5th.
Among the challenges, drought conditions that continue to grip the region make Arizona and the rest of the Southwest high-risk zones for wildfires, witnesses told the committee. Senators on the Energy and Natural Resources Committee called for more aggressive management of fires. That includes more firefighters on the ground, air tankers, fire repellent, and control burns.
Per acres burned on a wildfire in August puts more than 5 times as much smoke as a controlled burn in May and June.
But witnesses from the Forest Service and Interior Department noted that Congress increased firefighting funds last year, which should help. One promising new practice is the use of drones to fight fires.
We have a fleet. I think we're approaching 500 DOI-owned drones.
But committee members also point to a low-tech solution, urging people to be careful since they start more fires than natural causes.
So with the 2018 fire season upon us, I want to start with a plea to people everywhere. Just please be smart about fire. We can make a measurable difference in what this wildfire season ends up looking like, and it starts with being careful.
Jeffrey Ruber of the Interior Office of Wildland Fire told the committee that fire activity in the Southwest is expected to peak in May or June, with a significant large fire potential until then. In Washington, Danny Coble, Cronkite News.
It began with the Roaring 20s and, except for a few years during wartime, has been an annual tradition for students from around the country, competing in the Scripps National Spelling Bee.
Danny Coble in our Washington Bureau was on hand for the start of this year's competition.
8 Arizona students today arrived at National Harbor to take on the 3-day nerve-wracking Scripps National Spelling Bee.
Pastrella. P-A-S-T-E-U-R-E-L-L-A. Pastrella.
The 91st Bee began this morning with 516 participants taking a written test before taking their turn on stage to spell for the audience.
Cambio. C-A-M-B-I-O. Cambio.
Contestants got only one word in this round to misspell it and you're out. Some of the words were challenging.
S-C-Y-L-I-O-R-H-I-N-I-D.
But Lindsay Davis of Goodyear was confident.
Preparing for spelling bees for over 4 years.
This is Lindsay's last chance at a bee title. The Estrella Mountain Elementary School 8th grader will age out after this year. This is also the final year for St. George of Peoria, who is in 8th grade at Legacy Traditional School.
And if I get out, I'm going to be okay with that because it's my last year and I tried my hardest and I'm so excited to be here.
Now 7 of those Arizona students will advance on. One girl from Peoria was eliminated today. Reporting at National Harbor, Maryland, Danny Coble, Cronkite News.
Thank you for joining us for this special edition of Cronkite News. For top Arizona stories anytime, go to cronkitenews.azpbs.org.